Special guest, the renowned French economist Thomas Piketty, who's live in Paris tonight. Would you please make him feel welcome? And before we put your questions to Thomas, we asked the ABC's analyst, Casey Briggs, to step us through the growing wealth divide here in Australia.
We're in one of the wealthiest countries on earth. Decades of riches have rained down upon us. For some, though, it's been a torrent, while others have barely felt a sprinkle. In 2003, the least well-off 20% of Australian households shared in just 1% of the nation's wealth. The wealthiest 20%, they had around 59%. And in the years since to 2017, our economy grew and we collectively made it rain. The spoils just didn't fall evenly across the country. In 2017 dollars, there were 2,000 extra bucks per house in these households, and $1.3 million for these ones. In those years, these houses grew their average wealth by 6%, and these by 68%. And that was all before a massive economy-changing event in 2020. You may have heard of it. If you work in an occupation that tends to pay less, it's far more likely you were one of the many newly jobless last year. Before the pandemic, hospitality staff made up about 2.5% of all Australian workers. But the industry shrank more than half and made up about 1/5 of all the layoffs from February to May. Most of them waiters, bartenders, baristas. Retail workers saw their industry shrink by 13%. And those, by the way, are both occupations dominated by women. Workers on higher incomes didn't take much of a hit at all. As for the bigwigs, the number of people in managerial jobs, they dropped by just over 2%. Professionals saw an immediate contraction of around 1.7%, but recovered fast. There are now more white-collar workers than before the pandemic began.
All right, so on that note, our first question for Thomas comes from Jacob Andrawatha.
Thomas Piketty, your work has been insightful in revealing the inequalities of capitalism today, yet globally we've had the massive protests for climate action in the US against police killings of African Americans, in your own country, the Yellow Vests movement, and in India, farmers rising up. These protest movements indicate a distrust with our political system and anger with the inequalities around us. You rightfully propose a progressive global tax as a solution to these inequalities, but isn't it utopian to expect that politicians and the rich would agree to having a significant proportion of their wealth taken away from them without struggle?
Thomas Piketty.
Yeah, well, they don't need to agree. If you look at history, the movement toward more equality has always been a fight. And I think, this fight has to continue, regarding many dimensions of inequality. Inequality of income is very large. Inequality of wealth is incredibly large. In a country like Australia or France, for that matter, the bottom 50% of the population owns, about 5% of total wealth, and the top 10% owns around 60% of total wealth. So the amount, the level of concentration of wealth is enormous. We have enormous gender inequality, racial inequality. In my country, in France, people pretend that racial discrimination sometimes is more an issue for the US and for France, but in fact, the colonial legacies, the colonial past is also very important to understand today's inequality. So coming back to your question, it's the movement toward equality has always been a fight. So, when you have the New Deal in the United States in the 1930s that put in place under Roosevelt progressive taxation with a top tax rates up to 90% or even 91% on the very top incomes, and this is going to continue for several decades. This was not done with the authorization and approval of very rich billionaire and taxpayer of the US at the time. There was a political majority to impose it. There was an enormous legal battles, the Supreme Court, battled against Roosevelt. But in the end, the political majorities managed to, in that example, to reduce inequality quite substantially and to pay for public infrastructure, public investment, social security system, which by and large, were a big success.
Thomas,
for the
on that
country.
note, I just want to bring in
I think
Gigi
this
Foster.
fight has
The
to
questioner asked, is this idea of a progressive global tax system to solve these inequalities utopian?
So, I mean, my question to Thomas is really, do you think that this is the moment that we can now take action in the same way that was done at the time of FDR, for example, and around the world everybody just sort of has a light bulb go on and says, oh yeah, whoops, we need to tax wealth globally. We need to do this measure, that measure. Here are the things that will fix this problem. My concern is that not that we are not recognizing the inequality problem. I think we do recognize the great wealth inequality particularly, but the global idea that we're sort of going to all collaborate and have a happy, new world in which we're all taxing wealth and we're all collaborating, some country is going to be the odd man out, and that's where all the rich people are going to flee, and they're going to put their money there, and they're going to evade the taxes.
Bruce, what do you make of this sort of proposal? A new system replacing what we've got?
I think we
I think
we need to.
In some cases, we need to
Let's
change
just hear from
indeed
Bruce as a response to
international
that
legal
first.
system.
I don't think these things can be solved politically without the will of the people. And the will of the people is a moral decision we all have to make. And until we make a moral decision, like any decent 8-year-old would make, and say that inequality is unfair, then we're not going to go there. As Gigi said, if you start taxing people, they'll go to a tax haven. It's disgusting to have a tax haven, and yet we accept it. So we have to change our moral outlook on how the world works. And it means that we have to go to the places where our entrepreneurs and politicians come from, and in this country it's private schools, and we have to talk to those kids about fairness. And it's not about whatever it takes. It's not about winning the game. It's about being a good person, being a good citizen. And I don't think that's happening in our world at the moment on many levels, be it economy, race, women. It's just not happening.
So, Thomas, the point that's being made is that we're just not willing to make the moral choice for what you propose.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think teaching is very important. Teaching better values is very important, but we also need to change the rules of the game. So, the problem is that we've created a system where we've created a sort of sacralized right, to make a fortune by using the public infrastructure of your country, by using the education system of your country, and then you can push on a button and transfer your wealth somewhere else, and nobody is able to follow you and to make you pay the tax that you should pay. But this system has been man-made. It has been created by a very sophisticated international treaties, and then 20 years, 30 years later, we come and say, oh, too bad, we don't know where the rich are, we can't tax them, so we are going to have to tax you, the immobile people, the middle class, the lower middle class. But of course, these people are very unhappy with this statement. So what we need to do is to change, in particular, the international treaties on free capital flows without any taxation, regulation, coordination. And it's up to each country, to put conditions. We've started to see OECD discussion about automatic transmission of information, about who owns what, where, but this is still, very much an informal discussion. We need each country to put condition and to say, I don't want, that kind of system which in effect implies that the tax burden is always going to fall back on the middle class and lower middle class, and which make people hate globalization the way it is. So it's really up to you to change these international agreements. We don't need to wait for every country in the world to agree.
It's up to Australia. I think a lot of our politicians will like that thing. I want to take our next questioner tonight, Maria Baranova.
Thank you. Bill Shorten in Australia proposed changes to franking credit policy. Jeremy Corbyn in Britain campaigned for giving 10% of ownership of big companies to workers. We tried to address inequality, but we suffered catastrophic losses, even in the Labour strongholds. What gone wrong with their political message?
So this is something that Thomas writes about in his latest book. But Stan, I want you to answer that first. What's happened to the political left? Why can't they win?
A couple of things. One is that the political left, and this has been a project now of the past 40 years or so, and Thomas talks about this in both of his books, has become much more captive of cosmopolitan, metropolitan issues that don't necessarily address their previous working class constituency. There's been a really interesting thing happen in politics in the United States and in Australia, that the educated classes, the university classes, have moved more to the left, the Democrats and Labor, and the working classes have moved more to the right. John Howard talked about Howard's battlers. Remember Donald Trump with that appalling phrase, "I love the poorly educated." Well, of course he did, because these were the people that he could say they have abandoned you, they have deserted you. And remember, there is some merit to this. In 2007, 2008, Barack Obama becomes president on that slogan of "Yes, we can" and hope. And he stood there and protected the bankers. He stood between the pitchforks and the bankers. No banker went to jail. No banker lost their home or their jobs. Within a year, the bankers' bonuses were back. But people lost their homes. People lost their jobs. And then what did Barack Obama say to these people? Well, they always cling to their God and their guns. And then Hillary Clinton dismisses them as deplorables. You know, as William Blake once said, the poet, "A dog starved at his master's gate will predict the ruin of the state." And inequality is ruining the state, deforming our politics. And the left has a lot to answer for in this.
Thomas, that's, I suppose, an end point. You write about how we got there.
Yeah, you know, I think the center left and the center right, you know, have made big mistakes, you know, in the way we've been organizing globalization in the past decades. But, you know, my problem is not to blame, you know, different people. It's to see how today we can change this organization of globalization. And, you know, I think the bottom line is that you cannot have free trade, free capital flows with other countries if you don't have, at the same time, a minimum level of common taxation for the most powerful economic actors, some common environmental policy with, you know, with targets in terms of carbon emissions, which can be monitored and which can be sanctioned if they are not properly followed, and more generally with you know, a social agenda to make globalization work in terms of distribution of income and wealth. So, you know, I'm not against the circulation of goods and services and investment, but this has to come in international agreements together with you know, a minimum level of common taxation and social policy. And, you know, this can be done. This is really up to you, up to us.
Hamish, can I ask Thomas a question?
We may not have time for it, but you can go for it.
I'll ask, you would know Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, who recently gave the Reith Lectures in January, where he talked about the sweep of history from Glasgow to Glasgow, from Adam Smith and the moral sentiments of capitalism to the COP negotiations in November in Glasgow. And he makes the point that across capital, as it was defined by Smith, which had to have a moral sentiment at its core, that we have lost the moral sentiments. And he tracks that through the credit crisis, the COVID crisis, and then the climate crisis. And I guess he posits something I think we all learnt through COVID, which was in COVID, we all started to put very different things forward, almost globally, but certainly nationally, around the position of care and care at the centre versus economics. And then climate is going to teach us about a form of tax on carbon. And I think these things move between left and right, Stan. They're not defined by the left and right. These are the global issues that determine whether we will be a sustainable world. And then you add to that the issues of our young people and our women. And you write in your book that the patriarchy during the latter part of the 20th century set in train what I think we're now seeing with our protest movements with women, which was keeping women out of the upper echelons of earning. And so, Stan, the women who weren't earning, they were there because of the patriarchy and a very misogynistic history. And those women are rising up too.
Are you
They're not
concerned-
left or right. These are the macro issues about a sustainable
Are you
world.
concerned, Thomas, that part of the problem with the modern left is that it's so focused on things like identity politics that some of these old-fashioned, if you like, kind of core economic issues about inheritance tax and wealth taxes have been forgotten, and you actually see very few parties on the left around the world even dare to propose them because they would much rather talk about, LGBTI issues, for instance?
Well, I'm not so sure. I think you have more and more left people across the world, and also people from the right, who approve that, we need more redistribution of income and wealth. For instance, in the United States, if you look at opinion polls, there's a vast majority of public opinion today, not only among Democrats, but also among Republicans, that there should be a wealth tax. And, the wealth tax proposal that was made by Sanders and Warren during the Democratic Party primary last year, both together, they got almost half of the vote and more than half of the vote among the younger voters. And if you look at opinion polls today, a majority of US public opinion supports this. The Green Party in Germany last week made this new platform public. This includes the reintroduction of a wealth tax in Germany. I think these issues are changing. I can tell you, when I published Capital in the 21st Century back in 2014, I had discussion with Elizabeth Warren in the US or social democratic or green leaders in Germany. And at the time, the consensus for the wealth tax was much less clear than what it is today.
So, Thomas,
I think
even if
things
we have
are changing.
Even if we have a consensus of opinion, right? If people feel, oh yes, this is something that I want to stand behind, I still want to come back to the fact that this notion that we're going to all come together as a globe and unite upon the moral sentiment, of we must tax the wealthy.
Climate change.
There's no way. Climate change has been stalling for
failure.
decades because we can't do it. So what we need to focus on, I think, as individual sovereign nations is what can we do in our sovereign borders now, and how can we sort of trap the wealthy into being taxed? And that's where the proposal, which I'm sure you've seen in many different countries, to tax unimproved land comes from. Because if you buy a land piece here in Australia, let's say you bought it in 1980 for $200,000, and today it's $4 million, you just get that huge, massive amount of wealth just as a windfall gain because of the efforts of Australia to develop that area where your house is, and that's not fair. And that kind of policy is feasible for us. What's not feasible is to somehow imagine that 200 and some odd nations around the world are all going to come together and agree. Another thing that's a problem, of course, is corporate taxation. We can't tax Apple, Google. These places do huge amounts of activity in our countries, and yet they don't pay any tax, basically. Now, how do we get around that? We can send them a bill. Australia can say, you are not going to trade here unless you pay this estimated amount of tax on your estimated activities here. And we have to stand courageously and say that to these companies, because we otherwise won't get them out.
So on that note, we're going to have to say goodbye to Thomas Piketty because we're going to lose the connection with France. We're so grateful to you for joining us tonight. Would you please thank Thomas Piketty?